On the 29th of March 1849, in the fort at Lahore, a boy of 10 signed a treaty that gave away the most valuable object in Asia in a single sentence. The sentence named no price. Every other clause in that settlement dealt in rupees, in lakhs and crores, in war costs and pensions. The clause about the diamond contained no figure at all, and it never has. This is the story of the Koh-i-Noor, told as a matter of money rather than romance. Where the stone came from, and how many times it changed hands without once being bought. The bill for 2 wars that put it into British hands, and the Himalayan kingdom that was priced in writing in the very same settlement in which the diamond was not. The day in a London workshop when nearly half of it was deliberately ground away. And why, 175 years later, nobody has ever been able to put a number on it. The clause is Article 3 of the Treaty of Lahore, and it is short enough to hear in full. The gem called the Koh-i-Noor, it reads, which was taken from Shah Suja ul Mulk by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, shall be surrendered by the Maharaja of Lahore to the Queen of England. That is all of it. 28 words transferring what was probably the most famous single object on earth. Notice what the sentence does not do. It does not buy. It does not value. It records no consideration, which is the word a lawyer uses for the thing given in exchange. Article 4 of the same treaty fixed the boy's pension at not less than 4 and not more than 5 lakhs of company's rupees a year, so the drafters were perfectly capable of putting numbers on paper. They chose not to put one here. The boy was Duleep Singh, the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, and he had been placed on the throne of the Punjab at 5 years old and was 10 when he signed. On the same day, his kingdom stopped existing. The Punjab was annexed. The property of the state was confiscated to the East India Company in part payment for the cost of the war, and the youngest man in the room lost a country and a diamond in one morning. The man who wanted that clause was James Brown Ramsay, the Earl of Dalhousie, Governor-General of India, and in private he was entirely explicit about his reasons. He wrote that the stone had become, in the lapse of ages, a sort of historical emblem of conquest in India, and that it had now found its proper resting place. That is not an argument about worth. It is an argument about what an object says when you are the one holding it. And here is the question this whole story comes down to. So put your answer in the comments before you hear mine. Was the Koh-i-Noor bought, taken, or given? The treaty was real. It was drafted, witnessed, and signed, and Britain has rested on that fact for 175 years. The hand that signed it belonged to a 10-year-old whose army had been beaten in the field and whose country was being abolished in the clause above. See whether you still think the same thing by the end. This is the detail a financial history has to hold on to. Everything else in the settlement of 1849 was accounted for. The treasury at Lahore, the guns, the state lands, the revenues, the jewels of the household, all of it went into a reckoning against the company's war expenses, and the company's clerks were meticulous men who counted shawls. The diamond alone was lifted out of that reckoning and sent to a person, and no clerk anywhere ever assigned it. A figure. An object outside the accounts is an object without a price, and very nearly every argument that has followed grows out of that one fact. You cannot say Britain paid too little because Britain paid nothing. You cannot say the Punjab was underpaid because the Punjab was not paid. There is no number in the record to dispute, so the dispute has had to be about words instead, and words do not settle. to see why that clause had to be written the way it was, you have to look at what the stone had been doing for the 300 years before it. The history of the Koh-i-Noor is a history of transfers, and the striking thing about every one of them, from a money point of view, is that not a single one was a sale. It came out of the ground in the diamond country of the Deccan, in the alluvial fields near Kola on the Krishna River, in the region European merchants called Golconda. There are no mine records. There is no first buyer. Stones from those fields reached rulers as tribute, as loot, or simply as the property of whoever controlled the ground, and the earliest years of this one cannot be traced at all. The first solid appearance in a document is in the memoir of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, written after his victory at Panipat in 1526. He describes a great diamond that had come down from the sultans of Delhi, and he does not price it in coin. He says a judge of diamonds valued it at half the daily expense of the whole world. Hold that valuation up to the light, because it is doing something strange. He is not saying the stone is worth 100,000 rupees. He is saying that it cannot be measured against coin at all, only against the running cost of everything there is. 4 centuries before an insurance market existed to argue about it, the diamond was already being described as a thing that stood outside prices. For the next 200 years, it sat in the Mughal treasury, set at some point into the peacock throne, and here an honest history has to stop and admit a difficulty. European travelers described enormous diamonds at the Mughal court, and matching those descriptions to the stone that is now in London is argued over to this day. The weights disagree, names move between stones, the certainty starts a good deal later than the legend does. What is not in doubt is 1709. Nader Shah of Persia took Delhi, held the city for weeks, and left with the imperial treasury, the throne, the gems, and the stone. The name we use dates from about that point. Koh-i-Noor, Mountain of Light. It was not a purchase. It was the largest single removal of wealth from India before the company managed it, and it was carried out at sword point. Nader Shah was assassinated in 1747, and the diamond went to one of his commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, who founded the Afghan monarchy. It stayed in that family through 3 generations of coups, blindings, and exiles. Every one of those transfers happened because somebody had lost a throne. Not one of them involved a price, a receipt, or a buyer. In 1830, it came to Lahore, and this is the only moment in the whole history that even resembles a transaction. Shah Shuja, a deposed Afghan king living under Sikh protection, handed the diamond over. What he expected in return was an army to put him back on the throne in Kabul. He never got it. The consideration was promised and never delivered, which in any other contract would be the end of the matter. The man who received it was Ranjit Singh, the founder of the Sikh Empire, a one-eyed cavalry commander who had built a state out of a dozen rival chiefdoms and who wore the stone on his arm at Durbars where he wanted the point understood. He is said to have wanted it sent to the temple at Puri when he died in 1839. His treasurer did not comply, and whether he ever said it is disputed. So the ledger for 3 centuries reads like this: mined by nobody knows who, taken by force at least 4 times, handed over once for a promise that was never kept, left to a temple possibly, and not delivered. In 300 years of documented history, the Koh-i-Noor was never bought and never sold, and by 1849 there was not a single figure anywhere in the record for a British official to inherit. What turned a trophy into a treaty clause was a bill. 2 wars in 4 years, both of them expensive, both ending in a settlement written by the winners, and it is the second of those settlements that takes the diamond out of Lahore. The first is where the arithmetic starts, and the arithmetic is worth going through slowly because it is what makes the silence about the diamond so loud. Ranjit Singh died in June 1839, and the state he had built did not survive him by a decade. 4 rulers in 6 years. A court in which the succession was settled by assassination more than once. And a standing army, the Khalsa, which had become the real power in the Punjab and knew it. The British sat at Firozpur across the Sutlej and waited for the thing to come apart. The First Anglo-Sikh War began in December 1845 and was over in 10 weeks. Mudki, Ferozshah Shah, Aliwal, Sobraon, 4 battles, all of them costly, the last of them decisive. The Sikh army fought well enough that the company came out of that war determined never to fight it a second time, and the terms it imposed were shaped by exactly that. The Treaty of Lahore of March 1846 required the Lahore state to pay 1.5 crore of rupees, 15 million, as the expenses of the war. That is the number to hold on to because of what it is, not a valuation and not a fine, an invoice. This is what beating you cost us, and you are going to pay it. Lahore did not have 15 million rupees. A defeated state rarely has cash, and the company knew it, so the treaty took territory in place of the shortfall, the hill country between the Beas and the Indus, which included the Valley of Kashmir. A debt that could not be met in coin was settled in land, which is an ordinary enough piece of public finance apart from the scale of it. Then, 1 week later, the company sold it on. The Treaty of Amritsar of the 16th of March 1846 transferred Kashmir and its dependencies out of British hands altogether, and in consideration, the document says, the new ruler would pay to the British government the sum of 75 lakhs of rupees, 7.5 million for a Himalayan kingdom, in writing with a date on it. The buyer was Gulab Singh, the Raja of Jammu, a Dogra chief who had served Ranjit Singh for 30 years, had kept his own treasury intact all through the war, and had been careful never to commit his troops against the British. He got a kingdom out of the settlement his own side had lost, and his family ruled it for a century. Put the 2 silences beside each other, because this is the heart of it. A kingdom of mountains and lakes, and something over 1 million people was given a price, and the price was 75 lakhs, and it was printed in a treaty and paid. 3 years later, in a settlement drafted by the same government in the same city, the diamond got a sentence with no figure in it at all. It is worth being precise about what 1846 did not do. It did not take the Koh-i-Noor. The stone stayed where it was, in the treasury at Lahore, in a state that was now a British dependency with a British resident and a garrison inside the walls, ruled in name by a boy of 7. The company had its bill paid and its territory banked, the diamond it left alone. That arrangement lasted 2 years. In 1848, the governor of Multan rose, the revolt spread through the Punjab, and the Second Anglo-Sikh War followed, Ramnagar, then Chilianwala, in January 1849, which was bloody enough that the London papers treated it as a defeat, and then Gujarat in February, which finished it. The Sikh army surrendered at Rawalpindi. This time there was no dependency left to negotiate with, and nobody pretended otherwise. The terms of March 1849 are less a treaty between states than an inventory. The Punjab was annexed outright. All the property of the state was declared confiscated to the East India Company in part payment of its debt to the company and of the expenses of the war. Everything the Lahore treasury held became, in a stroke, an asset on a balance sheet kept in Leadenhall Street. And the drafters made one exception to that, deliberately, in the clause we started with. The diamond did not go into the company stock to be valued and disposed of like the guns and the shawls and the horses. It went to the Queen as a person, by name. Dalhousie pushed hard for that, and his reason is the one he had already written down. What mattered about the stone was never what it was worth. Getting it to London took a year, and the way it was done tells you a good deal about the problem of owning a thing with no price. Nobody could insure the passage. There was no market value to insure it for, and no underwriter in London who could have carried the loss, so the risk was carried personally by the Governor-General, sewn into his clothing. Dalhousie had the stone stitched into a belt he wore day and night on the road down from Lahore to Bombay, a small leather pouch, double sewn, chained to the belt, and the belt never off him. He wrote that he had done the sewing himself, and that he slept in it. For a man with an army and a treasury at his disposal, that is a curiously domestic solution, and it was the only one available. In April 1850, the diamond left Bombay aboard the steamship Medea, and the voyage was miserable. Cholera broke out on board, and a port refused the ship entry. A gale ran for 12 hours and did enough damage that she had to be nursed the rest of the way. The most valuable object in the empire spent that storm in a locked box, uninsured and unvalued, because there was no other way to send it. She reached Portsmouth at the end of June, and on the 3rd of July 1850, the diamond was presented to Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace by the Deputy Chairman of the East India Company. The company was 250 years old that summer, almost to the month, and it marked the anniversary by handing over the one item out of the whole Punjab settlement that it had never been allowed to price. What Victoria received was not private property, and this matters more than anything else in the story. The stone entered the crown jewels, held by the sovereign in right of the crown. That is a legal category and not a figure of speech. It means the object is not the monarch's to sell, to pledge, to lend against, or to give away, and every single thing that has happened since runs into that wall. The following year it went on public display at the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park in a gilded cage built for it alone, and just over 6 million people came through that building over 5 months. It is probably the largest audience any single object had ever had anywhere. And the verdict of that audience, recorded in newspapers and letters and diaries all through the summer, was that the thing was a disappointment. The reason was technical. The stone had been cut in the Mughal manner, which preserves weight and size at the expense of brilliance, and it had been made to be seen in Indian daylight rather than under glass in a London hall. Visitors said it looked like a lump of glass. The organizers built a darkened enclosure and added gas jets to force some fire out of it, and it did not really work. That summer is the nearest thing to a market test the Koh-i-Noor has ever been given, and it failed it. 6 million people, no price, and a general conclusion that the most famous diamond in the world was dull. Value in a stone is not a property of the stone. It is a property of what people see when they look at it, and in the summer of 1851 they saw very little. Prince Albert drew the obvious conclusion, And it was not that the public was wrong. He decided that the stone was wrong. Over the following year, he took advice from mineralogists, from the Queen's jewelers, and from the trade in Amsterdam. And the decision he arrived at is what makes this an episode about money rather than about jewelry, because it meant deliberately destroying a large part of the asset. In the summer of 1852, the firm of Costa, the leading diamond cutters in Amsterdam, sent over a man and a machine. A steam-driven cutting mill was installed on the premises of Garrard, the crown jewelers, in the Haymarket. The cutter's name was Voorsanger. The work was done in London under guard, and it was followed in the newspapers with something close to sporting interest. On the 17th of July, the Duke of Wellington, then 83 years old, was brought in to set the first facet going, a piece of theatre that everybody present understood exactly. He was dead within 2 months. The most recognizable Englishman of the age put his hand to the wheel, and the diamond taken out of the Punjab 3 years earlier began to come apart under it. The cutting took 38 days, which is a long time at a wheel. The reason was caution. The stone had flaws in it. The cutter was working on the most closely watched object in London, and nothing he took off could ever be put back. The bill for the work is usually given at about £8,000, which was a serious sum, more than the price of a good London house. When it came off the wheel, the stone weighed a little over 105 metric carats. It had gone on at a little over 190. 85 carats, near enough, had been ground away, and what comes off a diamond in cutting is not a set of smaller diamonds. It is dust and chips, and it was gone. Just under 45% of the object was destroyed on purpose with the approval of the Crown in order to make what remained more agreeable to look at. It is the only case I know of in which a nation improved its most valuable single possession by throwing away nearly half of it, and no one involved could have told you what the half was worth. Set that against anything you can actually price. A house loses 45% of its value, and a surveyor writes the number down. A ship is broken up, and the scrap has a market. A portfolio falls by nearly half, and the loss appears on a statement, in figures. Here there is no statement, no figure, and no write-down anywhere, because the asset had never had a price to be written down from. Did it work? Partly. The recut stone is a shallow oval, brilliant, and it does throw light in a way the old one never did. But the cutters kept spread rather than depth, so the fire is thinner than a modern stone of that size would give, and opinion at the time was divided about whether it had been worth it. Victoria wore the result as a brooch. One thing before we go on: if you subscribe, it genuinely helps this channel keep going, and there is a new piece of British financial history every single day. And notice what the recutting settled, quietly, without anybody appearing to decide it. Before 1852, there was an argument to be had about whether the Koh-i-Noor was an object of Indian craft, cut by Indian cutters in an Indian style, with a documented shape and a known weight. After 1852, that object does not exist. What sits in the Tower of London today is a British stone made out of an Indian one. So, what does Britain actually hold? In law and in money terms, 175 years on. Not a diamond it bought. Not a diamond it can sell. Not a diamond that any government can hand back on its own authority. And not a diamond that anybody has ever managed to value. 4 negatives, and every argument about the Koh-i-Noor runs into all 4 of them. Physically, Its career since 1852 has been a procession through the women of the royal family. Victoria wore it as a brooch and later in a circlet. It was set into the crown made for Queen Alexandra in 1902, then into Queen Mary's crown in 1911, and in 1937 into the platinum crown made for the wife of George VI, where it sits in the front cross today on display in the Tower. It has been worn only by queens and by Queen's consort, and the reason given at court was superstition. The stone was said to bring misfortune to any man who owned it. Whether anybody's senior actually believed that is another question. What is true is that the convention was observed without exception for a century and a half, which is a strange thing to find in the middle of an inventory of crown property. On value, the position is genuinely unusual. The crown jewels are not insured in the way your house is insured. There is no policy, no annual premium, and no agreed sum because there is no replacement to buy and no prospect of a sale. The state carries the risk itself. A thing that cannot be sold cannot be priced, and a thing that cannot be priced cannot be underwritten. You will see figures quoted in newspapers all the same: 10 million, 100 million, priceless. They are guesses rather than valuations, because a valuation is an estimate of what a willing buyer would pay, a willing seller, and in this case there can be no seller at all. The Koh-i-Noor is the clearest example in British public property of an asset sitting entirely outside the price system. Which brings us to the claims. India asked in 1947, within weeks of independence, and asked again before the coronation in 1953. Pakistan asked in 1976, on the ground that Lahore, where the stone was surrendered, is a Pakistani city. Iran has claimed it because Nader Shah carried it to Persia. Afghanistan has claimed it because the Duranis held it for 70 years. 4 states, 4 different starting points in the same chain of conquest. Britain's answer has not changed in 70 years, and it is a narrow one. The diamond was obtained legitimately under the terms of a legal treaty. Read that carefully, and it is a claim about process and nothing else. It does not say the transfer was fair or freely made, or that the person signing understood what he was signing. It says the paperwork was in order. The paperwork was in order. The political answer, when politicians have offered one, is about precedent instead. Visiting India in 2010, the Prime Minister of the day was asked directly and said that if you say yes to one, you suddenly find that the British Museum would be empty. He made the same point again in 2013. That is an argument about consequences, not about the Punjab, and it concedes the interesting part almost by accident. The Indian side has not been consistent either, and it is only fair to say so. In 2016, the Solicitor General told the Indian Supreme Court that the diamond had been given voluntarily by Ranjit Singh's successors rather than taken, which is very nearly Britain's own case. The government then said it would make all possible efforts to bring it home. When the claimant's own law officer cannot settle what the transfer was, the silence in Article 3 is the reason. The most telling decision of the whole affair was taken in 2023. For the coronation, the palace announced that the Queen Consort would wear Queen Mary's crown, reset with Cullinan diamonds, and that the Koh-i-Noor would remain in the Tower. No treaty changed. No valuation was published. The stone was left out because of what it means, which is precisely the reason Dalhousie insisted on taking it in the first place. The honest case for the British position is that every owner in the chain held it by conquest, that the Treaty of 1849 is a real document rather than a pretext, and that a rule requiring the return of everything ever taken by a stronger power would empty half the museums in the world, India's own included. The honest case against is that a document signed by a 10-year-old under military occupation with no consideration and no valuation is not a transaction in any sense a modern lawyer would recognize. What the accounts add is the thing that neither side much likes to say. Nobody paid for it. Nobody was paid for it. 15 million rupees was invoiced for one war. 7.5 million was received for an entire kingdom. And in the same bundle of papers, the most famous object in Asia moves from one owner to another with no figure attached to it anywhere. The arithmetic that settles most historical arguments is simply not available here. So it cannot be closed with a ledger, which is why it is still open. A stone mined by nobody knows who, taken by force 4 times over, handed across once for a promise that was never kept, surrendered by a child in a fort with a British garrison in it, cut down by nearly half to make it prettier, and now fixed in a crown that no one alive is permitted to sell. Bought, taken, or given? Put your answer where I can read it.